So thank you all for coming. I know it's a Saturday morning. We're thrilled at the turnout. We'll just give a little introductions of who our two guests are. So Dava is an LA-based filmmaker who made her directorial debut with Bathtubs Over Broadway, which some of you may have seen. It screened last night here at VIFF. Bathtubs Over Broadway premiered at Tribeca, where it won the Albert Maysles Best New Documentary Director Award, which is huge. And before that, Dava has been an editor. You'd also worked on Two Trains Running, and also you worked on The Late Show with David Letterman, as well as various other award-winning documentaries and projects over the years.
Thanks for having me.
And then next is Brent, who is a Canadian-New Zealand filmmaker. I'm always amused by that. I always know you as like a Canadian, but Canadian-New Zealand filmmaker and the head of Hodge Films. You may know him from his films A Brony Tale, which looked at kind of the subculture of obsessed male fans of the My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. Middle-aged. And What Happened Next, the Dan Mangat documentary, and I Am Chris Farley and Pistol Shrimps, which was about Audrey Plaza and her friends playing basically recreational basketball with a bunch of all-female comedian players. So there you go. These are our guests. We can have an applause for them. Now, I'm just curious, how many of you have seen, and I left out the most recent project, of course, Freaks and Geeks, the documentary.
Yeah.
How many here have seen Brent's most recent film, Freaks and Geeks? Okay.
Hey, Ali produced it, so I'm glad you saw it. That's great.
A couple hundred times.
And then how many of you saw Bathtubs Over Broadway last night? Okay. Well, then as an introduction, since we'll probably be talking about those two projects today, I think it might be worth showing a little sample of each, and then we can dive into a conversation. But I think we'll start off by showing you the trailer from Freaks and Geeks, the documentary. They're both delightful and wonderful films, and so I encourage you all to go see them or watch them however you can after today's session. And you can actually see Bathtubs Over Broadway is playing again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m., I believe. So you were up for an early morning today, you can do it again tomorrow. Go see it. So I think let's start, Dava, I just, since that was a scene clip, just to give maybe a little bit more context since we didn't have a trailer, can you just tell people a little bit more about what the film is about? I mean, they were kind of introduced to it there, but for people that might not know, what is an industrial musical?
Sure, yeah, I mean, so this film follows a comedy writer for David Letterman who stumbles on this, it was actually, he was stumbling on recorded albums, souvenir albums from corporate musicals, and he didn't know what they were when he first discovered these things. It was just like, oh, this seems to be a musical from General Electric's 6th utility executive show, like what the hell is that? And gradually he starts finding more and more, and he realizes this was a whole thing that companies did between the 50s and like the mid 80s. They would do a private musical for their company, about their company, with huge Broadway stars spending millions of dollars, and nobody knew about it except the people who were in these shows or watching these shows. And they are unintentionally hilarious. I mean, our favorite one is a musical called The Bathrooms Are Coming. And the best song from that is called My Bathroom. And it's, it was for plumbing people. And it's a great musical. The songs are fabulous. It's like amazing stuff. And so he starts meeting the people. I follow him as he starts meeting the people who made these shows. And it becomes actually kind of a heartwarming, emotional journey for him that none of us really expected when we started it.
And these were made for decades, like the 50s, 60s, 70s, right up to the 80s. And like, when you see the film, you'll appreciate just the scale that they were at. I mean, I remember there's a quote of the first Chevrolet one had a budget of $3 million, which like, in today's dollars, that'd be $25 million. That's insane.
Yeah, and My Fair Lady that same year was like $450,000.
Yeah. We should also mention that the star of your film is sitting in the front row, if he doesn't mind us identifying him. Steve Young. Having just watched the film this week, when Steve walked in, I was like, oh my goodness, there's Steve Young. And so it's nice to see you here. If you can, how did the film actually start then? At what point did this show up on your radar? And how did you decide, yeah, this is a movie?
Well, I met him when I was an editor at The Late Show, and I didn't know that he was into this stuff when I was working with him. But I did know that he had a crazy, wonderful comedy brain that was very unusual. So we hit it off, and we stayed friends after I left the show and moved to Los Angeles. And he sent me some of these songs. And when I heard My Bathroom for the first time, it was kind of like, oh my God, what is this? This is crazy. He calls it the gateway drug, that song. And so, he put a book out about this stuff. And that's really when I thought, okay, wait, there's more to this than I thought. And who is this guy that I thought was just a comedy writer? And then he would tear up when he talked about these composers. And so I think that was the first time I thought, okay, if there's some emotional way into this story, then, and it's not just an educational thing about, in the 50s they did this, in the 60s they did this, then there's something there. So that's when I asked him, can I do this?
It seemed that, for Steve, it started out as like, oh, this is an amusement, this is really funny, these things are unintentionally funny, are hilarious. But then in the course of Steve's journey, and documented in the film, there's a lot of an emotional journey and a kind of a discovery of how this connected a lot of people. And it seems like, was the experience similar for you? Did this start out, did you think, oh, this will just be a lark, a funny topic? And then did you realize while making it was something else?
I kind of had the same journey that he did. I looked at it, like, at the beginning I thought, oh, we're going to be making fun of these companies. Oh my God, this is ridiculous what they were doing. And then I started to hear more of the songs and see more of the shows, and it was like, wait a second, this is way better than it's supposed to be. And some of these, I saw one clip from this J.C. Penney musical, and it was so beautiful. And I was like, this should be in a real musical. People need to know about this guy. So I did start to kind of take on the mission of, we've got to let people know about this and how cool it was actually, and still messed up and twisted and corporate America craziness, but much more heartfelt at the base of it than I expected.
We'll go from you to Brent on the topic of letting people know about something they didn't know about before. That seems to be a prevailing theme in a lot of your films. Freaks and Geeks obviously has become a huge cult hit and lots of people like it, but that, or even just the subculture of bronies, is the idea of finding something that's unheard of, is that kind of a guiding principle for the topics you've chosen?
Yeah, maybe unheard of, or just curiosity. There's usually one big question. Like, who's seen Freaks and Geeks, the TV show? That's more like it, yeah. Did you ever wonder why there's only one season of Freaks and Geeks? Because it's the greatest show. And so it's just like, that's the question. I'm like, why is there only one season of this? Or why do middle-aged men like My Little Pony? Or why is there no film about Chris Farley? Like, how did he even die? There's all these, as soon as that question gets asked, then I can't sleep. I have to make it.
Is there anything, they all seem to also have kind of a connection to pop culture, but it's kind of the obscure stuff in the back room of that pop cultural entity that people don't know about. Is that something that you have found, I know you've kind of carved out a space doing that, is that something that you find a viable way of like the topics you make?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's also just like that pop culture is just my culture. Like that's just like, Chris Farley is my Muhammad Ali, right? Like it's just the way I grew up. And so I always say, like, if I'm gonna do a music doc, it's not gonna be Bruce Springsteen, it'll probably be Weird Al. And this is sort of like how my heart pumps and how I move. I don't mean to choose. They come to me. I don't mean to choose them all the time. So they're usually a little bit off.
Speaking of how they come to you, then, can you tell us about how the Freaks and Geeks documentary came about? I know you had actually approached Judd Apatow in the course of making the Chris Farley film, right?
So actually, the other way. So we did. We approached Judd to be in the Chris Farley film, because I don't know if people know this, but Judd Apatow produced Cable Guy, and Chris Farley was meant to be the first Cable Guy before Jim Carrey. It's wild to think. Imagine him as Cable Guy. I can actually see it. But he didn't do that film. But we knew that, so we approached Judd Apatow, and he said, I can't be in the film. I didn't know him that well. But then he watched it, and he got back to us and said, just to let you know, I saw the film and I really liked it. And so then our team kind of drummed up this idea to go to Judd and ask permission to do the Freaks and Geeks film. And it was like, honestly, this is the funny thing about making movies. It wasn't formal. It's not like I waited in a room and like went into his office. It was like a text message. Where you're like, Judd, can we make this? He's like, yeah, it's fine. Ask Paul. And then Paul Feig's like, I'm fine. Like, it's that quick how and then you then you go and pitch it, and A&E said, yeah, we'll do. Like, it's funny how it works, but it was way more casual than I thought it would be.
I love how we normally have visions of people walking into a boardroom and making a whole song and dance and a proposal. You were texting Judd Apatow while in a laundromat?
That's right, yeah, I was doing my laundry.
The first pitch ever given to Judd Apatow from somebody while they're doing their laundry. That's amazing. And now you mentioned how you know, if you were going to make a film, it wouldn't be about Springsteen, it'd be about Weird Al. But that's not what your next music doc is. Can you tell us about your new project?
It's the biggest question that we all need to know. And actually, it's great, because Telus and STORYHIVE are behind this, but who let the dogs out? It's the biggest question that we don't have the answer to. Who actually let the dogs out? I want you to leave today and think about that. Because there's 9 different people in this world that claim that they let the dogs out. 9 different writers of that song, and they're all liars. I met them all.
Oh, I didn't realize. So there's controversy over who is the author?
Oh, big time. So it's like, we dated it now back to 1986. And and it's all from different areas of the world too. There's like a calypso version down in Trinidad. There's the Baha Men that are in the Bahamas. There's like a hairdresser named Keith that brought it back to London and got it to Chumbawamba's manager. It all comes back to Hanson's manager, actually, who just like made it a hit. Anyway, it's coming soon.
It's a sentence I've never heard before. It all comes down to Hanson's manager.
Yeah, these are really important documentaries.
So what I find interesting about all this is that for a long time, documentary has always been associated as the genre of like really serious stuff, global issues, social issues. You guys have demonstrated in your work that it doesn't necessarily have to be, and it's also, I mean, obviously, 2018, the year that like documentaries have broken bigger since, you know, Hoop Dreams and March of the Penguins. I mean, we've had 3 theatrical feature docs crack $10 million at the box office. RBG, 3 Identical Strangers, and Won't You Be My Neighbor, the Mr. Rogers film, which if you haven't seen any of those, you should go see them. They're all fabulous. But I mean, Won't You Be My Neighbor is at like $24 million at the box office. That's insane. I remember when it was a big deal that Hoop Dreams had crossed the 1 million threshold. So it seems like more than ever, people have an interest in seeing documentaries, or at least we've been hearing that, people are saying that in articles. Do you think that's true, or is that just certain themed documentaries?
I think it's true. I think definitely. Like, I mean, everyone when we first started pitching docs, there was CBC and National Film Board, and if they didn't pick up the Who Let the Dogs Out film, like you're just making it. There wasn't YouTube. There's a lot more avenues now.
They're more cinematic now. It's more fun to watch a documentary. It's not so educational every single time. You know, we're finding narrative arcs. There are emotional stories. I think, you know, the way we tell true stories is evolving so that they're more entertaining to watch.
You talked about, oh, this one works, sorry. You talked about how,
I'm back.
There we go. You talked about how, you know, if you had pitched it to those certain outlets that used to be the only ones, and they said, no, you just run out and make it. So how do you actually go about making your films? Do you go and pitch it to somewhere first, get the money, and then start making the movie? Or do you start making the movie and then go after the money?
I start making the movie. That's usually, I usually don't think it's a movie until I start filming, but it's just me, and everyone does it differently. And I think it depends if you're getting a commissioned film or you're doing acquisitions. And I think that's a little, there's different sort of methods to it. But like Chris Farley, I didn't go and start filming with David Spade. That wasn't going to happen. It had to be a very structured thing. Same with Freaks and Geeks, but like Pistol Shrimps, I just started showing up at Aubrey Plaza's basketball games and started shooting. I think there's a threshold too where you have to get to like 20 to 30% of the film and start making it and see that there's a story there, and then you say like, okay, this is actually a film that we continue. And I've gotten to that point in canned films. I've done stuff and just been like, oh, it's not going to work.
So you actually have like had to cut your losses on some projects that didn't.
I'm usually doing 10 films at a time, and then I'm cutting it's like startups. Like I'm like cutting them if they're not working.
I remember hearing somebody mention how, like, when you're a filmmaker, you're basically a serial entrepreneur because every single film project is like its own business, and that you have to have that energy and that drive to try to, like, lift it up, and then you move on to another one. So your entire life, your whole career is just constantly doing that.
I agree. And I also think that it's never the path that you think, like, every one of them is a little business, but it's never the path that you thought it was going to go. Like, I didn't think Telus was going to be a part of Who Let the Dogs Out, but they are, and it's incredible. I don't know if I'm allowed to announce this, but your incredible film, but Blumhouse?
Oh
That's public, right?
Yeah, they're the investors, Blumhouse and Impact Partners. Yeah.
But Blumhouse is like, because everyone knows Blumhouse, like it's Get Out and Paranormal Activity. I didn't think they would pick up a film like this.
I was completely shocked that both Impact Partners and Blumhouse wanted to invest in this film because, Impact Partners is social justice films, and then Blumhouse obviously is horror. But they did The Jinx. They're trying to do more documentaries. So, I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it.
How did that come about? Like, did you get them involved early on, or was it late in the process?
It was about 2 years in. We'd been shooting for a while and doing pitch reels and stuff, and then we got accepted to the Sundance Creative Producing Lab, and that's where we met Impact Partners. And then they said, we want this. We want to try this new partnership with Blumhouse so that we kind of probably, they're ultimately splitting the risk. So it's we're the kind of guinea pig project for that, I think.
I was curious whether you had to try to spin it as some, not social justice, but like some social relevance to Impact Partners. Was that anything? Or?
I didn't have to pitch it that way. I showed them the pitch reel, and one of the execs there started to cry, and I thought, okay, they're seeing the heart to this project. And I think, it's about the arts. There is some kind of, you are learning something that you didn't know. So it wasn't totally outside of their wheelhouse. They do entertaining docs.
Yeah. Do you know who funded Freaks and Geeks?
Tell us.
Time Magazine. Wow. Yeah, it's weird. And they have like a little logo at the end. It's funny. You never know who's going to fund these things.
And how did they get involved? Did somebody tell you? Oh, Time's making docs.
A&E wanted. It was the same kind of thing. They were already doing a partnership with Time. I think in the end it comes up with Entertainment Weekly, like one of their sub brands. But yeah, that's where the checks came from.
David, you mentioned how the executives at Impact Partners really responded to the heart in your film. And it's certainly, that's what a lot of the reviews are talking about, and it's what kind of stands out. Was that something that you found in the edit suite and started to sculpt, or was it just naturally there?
The thing where Steve was connecting with these people that made these shows, it was naturally there, but it took us a while to get it. I knew it was there. But we did the final interview like 4 years after we started, and he was still telling me stories, like personal stories that I'd never heard before. And it's like, Jesus, dude, like, how did you wait that long to tell me that? So it really did develop ultimately in the edit after we were, I was getting him to kind of open up more along the process. So, it was a trust and time kind of situation. But I knew at the core it was there.
Now, on the topic of the edit suite, I mean, you're an editor. You have an incredible background as an editor. What was it like to actually be involved in both ends of the storytelling process on this film, from the front end and at the very end?
I loved it. If you're an editor, you're sitting in the room judging what the director, whoever's given you, oh my God, I can't believe they shot it like that. So part of this was me judging myself that way, like, oh my God, I can't believe you shot it like that. But it was also the best challenge of my life. I mean, there's a musical number at the end of this film that we shot on the Warner Brothers backlot, and that was the scariest and most wonderful thing I've ever done. And so it was that thing of just challenging yourself and knowing that there's something more in you and, giving yourself the shot to do it. So I loved it. I would do it again. I'm going to do it again.
I think it's always a good process for directors to actually see the other side, be in the edit suite. A lot of people do edit their own stuff, but if you haven't, it's good to sit with your editor. I remember I was working on a TV series once, and I'd shot a whole bunch of stuff, and I was like early on, and I think I was probably just following the model of like, oh, I don't want to miss anything, so I'm just going to hose it down, and I was just like basically not turning the camera off. And then I sat in the edit suite, and the editor, just to show that they had actually watched everything, was like, yeah, so that point where you zoomed in on that thing, it really, I don't know why you did that, it wasn't very interesting. And they just like critiqued everything. I was like, oh my God, I thought nobody would see that stuff. And then I realized what a colossal waste of time I had made for this poor person, and that schooled me. I was like, oh no, I'll kind of edit a little bit more on set or in the moment, so I'm not just filming indiscriminately everything. We're not surveillance cameras. You should try to filter it.
Well, that was another thing, that being an editor, I probably could have spent more time shooting certain things, but I would say to myself as it was happening, like, okay, I can do that with that, and so we can move on now. So I could be a little faster shooting. Some stuff I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd been, a little more rigorous, but I just know when I can cheat something, so,
And on Two Trains Running, you were also the second unit director. Yeah. Did your experience on that film, being involved in kind of the actual, like, capturing of footage, influence how you made this film?
Not so much. I mean, that was a great opportunity that Sam Pollard let me get out there and he would say, "Oh, I can't be at this shoot. You go do it." But that one wasn't as challenging. I mean, being a director is so much more than just being in the field and shooting material. You're overseeing every decision that happens. Really, you have to be kind of producing when you're directing anyway. I mean, right?
At least, yeah, if it's an indie film, for sure.
Yeah.
An indie film, you're putting on all the hats.
All the hats, yeah. So it's not just about the creative process. It's so much more than that. And so that was really where the challenges for me were. You're handling this entire team. You've got to handle all the emotional stuff that's happening with all of your people. You've got to deal with the weaknesses that come up, it's like finding ways to utilize the fact that some of you have certain strengths and some of you don't, balancing it all out. So that was just the sheer humanity of all of it being on you and not wanting to disappoint people. And, that was a challenge.
You mentioned the kind of managing of personalities. Brent, was that, I mean, you work with a kind of a similar group of people on most of your films. Is that partly because those are the ones that you kind of know and trust?
Yeah. A lot of them are from Vancouver. I think it's the only people that are willing to still work with me. No, I'm kidding. It's just, honestly, I think it's who you grow up with. It's like we grew up making films for $0 together. So when there's money, you kind of want to use the people that did it when there was no money. And I think it's like a band. You just stick together. And different members have come in and out for different reasons. But yeah, we've stuck to a lot. And the whole Freaks and Geeks film was done by an entire Vancouver crew. I mean, yeah.
You've worked with those guys from, like, they also have amazing factories. There are other kind of companies.
Yeah, those guys. So Josh and Joe, the guys that shot it, they do that, and Austin's an editor here. And I guess Allie lives in Halifax now, but she was in Vancouver for a while. But honestly, I just think it's who you. It kind of goes back to not disappointing people, and it also goes back to who you feel comfortable with, because it is vulnerable. You're making art. You're making something that you care about, and you want the people around you to support that.
It is an intimate experience making a collaborative thing like a film. Making any art, I imagine, would be hard to make collaboratively, but film is so big and complex and expensive. So I remember hearing about how, like, it's impossible to get on Clint Eastwood's crews unless somebody dies. Like, it's basically, he's used the same crew for all of his movies that he's directed for, like, as long as he's been directing. And how it's just like, yeah, you don't get on that team unless somebody else, there's a vacancy, and that only happens because once you're on that team, you work until you die, because apparently it's so good. Everyone's like, oh man, no, Clint's the best.
Well, I really admire that. And you just look at Freaks and Geeks and how Judd knew them as kids and wanted to make sure they were stars. That's what I want to do with my crew. I want all of us to succeed. And so I think it's a very similar to, they've gone through experiences together, good and bad, and so they just want to keep having those. You also have to go on the road with these people, and you have to get along with them. You're in a van with them. Like, you have to get along.
It's a combination like being in a band or a marriage. It's like, it's both.
Yeah.
Dava, you mentioned that you want to do it again, editing and directing. What are you working on next?
Well, I'm pitching a couple of projects at the moment. They're both music related. I mean, those things do just seem to find me, and I love them. So, there's that, and then I've been consulting. I consulted on a Hulu doc recently. So it's still feeling out what's going to happen after this, and we're on the circuit still with this film for. Oh my God, we're like screening into the spring with it, so that's cool.
And are you is making films about musical themes? Is that something that's particularly of interest to you, or is it wide open?
Well, I mean, I like anything that's gonna challenge me, really. The best thing about docs is that you get to learn about some world you never knew about. So as long as it's something that I'm interested in, it's gonna teach me something. It's something that I feel like delving into for 4 years or whatever. But really, I really like these hybrid documentaries. You know, like I loved Wormwood. Stuff that's kind of challenging the way that we tell stories. Casting Jean Benet, I thought was genius. So anything like that that's going to give me an opportunity to push the way that we tell true stories, that's what I want to do.
And Brent, we heard about what you're working on next with the Who Let the Dogs Out, but you also have had a project since Freaks and Geeks. You just had something premiere on Netflix like yesterday.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we had a show called A User's Guide to Cheating Death. Our first doc series just premiered on Netflix. You can see it. You can watch it. It's a very like anticlimactic because there's no one to share it. Like usually you do it in a theater and you're like have these big premieres. No, I didn't say that. If there's anyone from Netflix, this is the best thing in the world. It is though.
I mean, it's the day after, so surely you're going to get a wave of people in the next week saying, "Hey, man, I just was watching something on Netflix and I realized this is yours."
I know, but it's just weird because it launches and you're like, "Yay!" But you're just there on your phone by yourself at the laundromat, still at the laundromat, just looking at it. It's cool. It's just different. It's great.
I look forward to the day that you're doing so well you have laundry in your own home. Read Netflix. It is funny that there's these multiple kind of waves that happen when you put a project or a film or movie out in the world, where you've got like the festival run and you get emails from people you know saying, "Hi, I saw it at such and such film festival," and then it's in theaters, and then it's on like airplanes, and then it's on TV. I always find like you can tell when, oh, it's now on a new platform. I'm suddenly getting messages from people telling me they've watched it. And I always actually found like airplanes had a shockingly high exposure rate. I've had more people sometimes tell me, "Finally watched that film of yours. I watched it on the airplane." I'm like,
Really?
This is 2 years ago, but thanks.
Yeah.
I am waiting for that moment.
Yeah.
I'm pumped for people to be able to see this film on an airplane because they're gonna be in the seats like kind of crying and like trying to hide it. Like I love that.
I imagine it would do very well on airplanes. It's actually, there's almost a way that you get really intimately involved in a film when you're watching it just on a seat back. We'll throw it open to the crowd now if there's any questions for either of our panelists. And if you do, just hold up your hand and then we'll get a microphone to you. Does anybody have any questions right away? Yes, Michelle at the back. We'll just get a microphone to you.
Thanks, Kevin. Dave, I'm just interested if you ever saw Atomic Cafe and if that was any kind of inspiration, if you had any relationship with the Loaders, Jane Loder and the Rafferty brothers, who, for some of the Capilano University students, it was a film where they used nuclear civil defense movies from the 50s and repurposed them to comment on Reagan's Star Wars defense program.
I love Atomic Cafe. It didn't actually inform this film, but I mean that's just a phenomenal movie. If you guys haven't seen it, there's also anything where you're using archival, and there's so many. Didn't LA 92 do that same kind of thing? But yeah, I mean, that's the other thing is finding new ways to use archival and tell stories. That's tough because. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, that's all right.
Just that you get into that habit of on-camera guy, cut to archival, on-camera guy, cut to archival, like just
Stock and talk is
yeah,
the laboratory
right. So, but that film is genius, the way that they edited that together. I mean, it's so much about the editing. It's amazing.
I mean, Brent, you had some lovely use of archival in Freaks and Geeks, the documentary, and I loved the animations and all that. How did that come about?
There's a writer on when we did Judd and Paul's interview. They both said you should talk to Gabe Sachs. He's a writer on the show, and I think I think he has stuff still. And then we went to his house, and he had this museum of Freaks and Geeks things. Like still, he just laid it all out in the garage and was like, "That's a Letterman jacket. That's the Norseman head." And he had everything. And then he pulls out this box of mini DVs. I was like, "No one's seen these." And it was just, it's like gold, right? Wow. It's actually gold. Like I started crying. I'm like, and I was like, I can just go and transcode these. Yeah, do what you want. And they're all 1 hour of like James Franco sweating, like going over his lines, and Jason Segel saying he wants to be a star one day. And you're like, wow, yeah. And then you had to clear it, which is like kind of annoying, but
did you have any problems with that?
No, I didn't have any problems with this film at all. It's actually like it's the opposite of what they had to deal with as a show.
That is not how it always goes.
Yeah, but like NBC. It just seemed like everyone was against that show being made, and it was the opposite for making this documentary. We didn't get any notes from the network, and it was like it was a dream come true. I think I'll always chase this kind of film again.
And then even because you have some big names as your interview subjects, so there was not any obstacles. They were all supportive. You were able to get interviews with them.
Yeah, that's a really hard. With Chris Farley, it was the hardest thing in the world. So I think I started with sort of celebrity interviews, and that was the hardest to get them for Farley because he died from a drug overdose, and a lot of people don't want to talk about their friend who died from a drug overdose. But with this, it was like Paul Feig and Judd Apatow said yes, so mom and dad said yes, and then everyone came. We were getting emails, like, Ali, we got emails from cast being like, hey, you got to make sure Seth Rogen's in this, right? We're like, yeah, no, we promise, we'll get to you. Like, and so I think once you get Judd's pass, we were in.
What about you, David? You have some big names too. You have Florence Henderson, you have Cheetah Rivera. Like, did you have any obstacles? Did anybody feel shame about having done this?
That was the craziest thing to me, is that the more famous you were, the less you were ashamed of having done corporate musicals. Susan Stroman, Florence Henderson, Cheetah Rivera, they're all really proud of having been in them.
Stroman's like a 5 Tony Award winning.
Amazing director, choreographer. Martin Short was the hardest one, I think, just because he was going to be at the Late Show that day, and it was like, we'll talk to you after the show, and then he had like 5 minutes, and that's the shortest interview is 7 minutes. Martin Short, but it was a great 7 minutes. He's singing, and it was crazy. But
I think all 7 minutes are in the film. That's what's great about documentaries. You can have a 7-minute shoot, and if you put 100% of your footage in the film, it seems like it's
but he delivered. In those. He knew it too. It was like, bam, bam, I gave you what you needed.
That's funny.
But generally, it was just scheduling stuff with them because they're all over the country and stuff like that. But they were proud of it.
Now, you mentioned doing Martin Short while he was on Letterman on the Late Show.
Yeah, it was like in the last 2 weeks before the show closed out. That was the other thing that happened with this movie is we didn't know the Late Show was going to close when we started. And so we were able to kind of track the last days of the Late Show with David Letterman, which was kind of heart-rending to me. It was, But luckily, all these stars were coming in at the end so I could get Martin Short.
Did the show provide an opportunity to get access to some of those people? Like, oh, well, you're coming on the show. Hey, can we do an interview? Was that anything?
Well, Steve had access to these people because he worked for Letterman, so he could say to, the bookers and all that stuff, hey, can you help us do this? So Steve really helped us get into some of that. But the show was cool. Nobody else really got to bring cameras back there. And some of the people at the show were kind of stunned that they let me just follow him around toward the end of the thing and to be there, when they're ripping the seats out of the Ed Sullivan Theater at the end. And so they gave me access, which was pretty awesome.
Those are some of my favorite bits in the film, actually, is seeing the glimpses behind the scenes of what happens on The Late Show and, like, seeing people in their hallways and in the offices, Dave with his feet up on a desk and just, like, that kind of the daily routine, but of a huge show that everyone watches. So it was actually a really fascinating glimpse. Steve, if we may ask you a question, we'll give you a microphone. What was it like for you to have, you're somebody that's normally behind the scenes. What was it like to have somebody following you around with a camera and now you're actually getting all this attention?
Well, thank you for inviting me here. This is really, I'm not a filmmaker, so I always feel very leery about commenting on this stuff. But yes, for 25 years, I was in the writer's room at the Letterman show. And I thought that was who I was, just somebody that you weren't going to see. You were going to hear somebody else perform my jokes or whatever. But all that time there, I was sharpening myself every day, just being up against other smart, funny people constantly. And I developed confidence. And then when I really had gotten up a good head of steam about these industrial musicals, I had such a burning desire to tell the world about them that pushed me out of the back room. And I've got to write this book. I've got to tell people. I've got to get up in front of people on stage and just show the world. And that was the sort of momentum there that pushed me somewhere I didn't think I would go.
Now I have to ask, has participating in this film and the exposure afforded by the film allowed you to find any great gets, any missed discoveries that you've always sought after in terms of albums that now somebody's like, I saw the film. Here is that long lost piece of gold that you've been looking for.
Some stuff does filter in. Dave got an email a couple of weeks ago from a guy who heard about the movie. Oh, when can I see Bathtubs Over Broadway? Oh, by the way, I have a 16 millimeter film of an RCA musical. And just like the
audience can't see, but Steve's eyes lit up reenacting that.
my eyes are permanently lit up. So stuff does float in, yes.
Awesome. Any other questions from the crowd? Yes, the middle of the theater.
My question is for Dava. It was really striking to me you mentioned that the budget of one of these. Oh, thank you. Hello. It was really striking to me that you mentioned the budget of one of these corporate musicals was $3 million, and in the same year, My Fair Lady was $450,000. So was there any element of sort of back to the social justice angle of like exposing the fact that so much money was being poured by corporate America into art that was not being shared as widely as maybe it should have?
Well, that was one thing too when I started this was, I wanted to dig in and find out, was there something there that, is more nefarious? And talking to all the people that made these and getting, finding research from the executives, all that stuff, it was, first of all, let's just start with the fact that this was a different America. The CEOs at that time got paid 12 times what their lowest paid employee did, and now that's 350 times. So, things have changed. They felt it was an investment in their people. These people would be staying in their companies for 25, 30 years. It was a tax write-off for sure, but the thing was that they had to motivate these people somehow. Because they were going to be with them. And it was also training. And they were making these shows. They ultimately were making the salesmen the heroes of these shows, which, imagine you're a salesman. Like, that's a tough gig. Most people don't want to see you show up. So they needed some kind of tool, and musicals were so hot back then. So they were still doing commercials and stuff for the public, but this was something they needed specifically to motivate these guys and tell them like what the new products were. This was an America that was making stuff, they were manufacturing goods. These people, it was all happening in the States. There was no global economy the way that we have now. And so it was really, I couldn't find anything where it was really negative, and the people involved were so proud to help out doing these shows, and so it was just like it wasn't there. That part wasn't there.
On the topic of any kind of negative criticism, have you ever had any kind of surprising kind of blowback for any topics you've tackled, Brent? Like, did people from My Little Pony get mad that you're focusing on bronies and not say what the original intention of that show might have been?
Hasbro was weirded out at the start, for sure. They didn't know what the brony thing was. They didn't know how to deal with it. It was huge. Like, when we started doing the Brony movie, there was a BronyCon, and it was 800 people. And the next year we finished the film, and there was 15,000 at that BronyCon. So we hit this one year where it just grew, and Hasbro didn't know what to do. They were like, we don't know. Is this a negative film? What are you doing? But yeah, you have to, absolutely, you're gonna get negative feedback all the time. You have to mediate it. That's fun. Like, you're supposed to have a little bit. Like, someone from Who Let the Dogs Out is going to be very mad when we say you're a liar. Someone's a liar. They didn't all write it.
Dave, have any of the corporations seen this film or had any anger about the exposure it's maybe given?
That was something that I was nervous about at the beginning, and how are we going to get the rights to this stuff? The crazy thing is that generally, these companies didn't even know this was in their history. The people that work there now, things have changed. You're not at the company forever. So they didn't save this stuff. They were a lot of them were kind of blown away that it existed. And so we did have to reach out for permissions to a couple of companies, and they were surprisingly helpful. Like JCPenney was really helpful. They were kind of like, we should be involved in this. Like, we should have our stuff in here. Kind of proud of it. Ford Motor Company, super helpful. GM.
Did you have to tell them or even present that it was a celebration as opposed to a critique or anything like that?
I had to show them how I was using the clips, for sure. We had to take one thing out, though. The Mary Kay company didn't want their musical, and it was a really awesome musical. It was so effective. It was, this woman is being told by her family and her friends that she shouldn't have a career. She doesn't need to have a career. She doesn't need to work. Mom, don't leave the house, that kind of stuff. And she felt this drive to go out there and sell Mary Kay, and it was really motivational. It was really showed how these things were making people want to do great work, for better, for worse. I don't know, Mary Kay, Anyway, I guess they were a little bit nervous about it.
What was their objection?
I don't know. They they were like, no, don't use it. And then they wouldn't respond to any more stuff. And we had so many other things to choose from that it was like, okay, fine. We'll put in 3 other clips in place of that. So, we just rolled with it. I didn't want to tangle with them. It wasn't worth it. It made me think, is there something there for some kind of documentary, another film maybe? But
I always find the relationship to corporations in movie making so hilarious, because when you're making dramatic production, like movies, those corporations pay you big dollars to get branded content, to get it embedded in the shot, to have the promotional value it affords. But when you're making a documentary and you're shooting it after the fact, and you're like, oh, we got this thing in the frame. Hey, can we get your permission? And they're like, oh, well, we'll see about that. It's like, what the hell? Yeah. Like, you should be paying us $250,000 for this placement. Don't, get off your high horse. Plus, you've cluttered our landscape by having the billboard or whatever it is on our shot. Yes. And that's what I always find. As a documentary filmmaker, you got to find the right lawyer on your project who gets that, because there's too many entertainment lawyers that are reticent. They're like, "Ooh, you got to take that out." It's like, what possible case would they have because we have that logo? No, that's going to wreck the shot if we take that over that moment. Like, no, put up a fight and get the smart entertainment lawyers. There's plenty, but there are some that are lazy and take their job as like, oh, let's reduce risk by just absolving anything that's like, there's just nothing that can be possibly contentious. Anyway, my little rant.
Most people the more films I make, I realize most people that don't want to be in the documentary mean that they maybe have done something wrong or don't want to talk about that subject. So like Freaks and Geeks, we got Garth Ancier. He's the NBC exec who canceled Freaks and Geeks. Seth Rogen's gone online and said, this guy's horrible. He's the devil. Like people hack at this guy. There was like a tweet that said, I hope everyone's having a good day except for the stingray that killed Steve Irwin and Garth Ancier who canceled Freaks and Geeks. Like, he gets hacked. and I thought, and even Judd was like, you're not going to get him. There's no way you're going to get him. And we just reached out to him, and he's like, I'd be happy to talk about this. I'd be happy to explain to the world why I canceled it. And he has very valid reasons on why he canceled this show. But if he had said no, I would have questioned if that he did something wrong. If you don't want to talk about it, like,
it's great that he's in the film. Like, it gives a weight to it that wouldn't have been the same without him.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah, right here in the front row. We'll get a microphone to you so everyone can hear.
Just a question for Dava. You being director and editor, and especially in this documentary industry, how many times have you come up you're sitting in front of the edit suite, and then you think, oh, my story is going totally different way from what I thought in the pre-production, and then what I shot in production, and now I'm sitting in post, and the story is going like taking a totally different shape. So how do you convince yourself and your team in that moment?
It didn't feel like it diverged that much, really. So for this project, I didn't really have that. The previous one, there was a little bit more where it was just a harder edit, but the director of that project was an editor too. So it's just, you just keep working it. And on this film, I was lucky to have, I would have had another editor, but I didn't have the budget to have another editor. So I brought in a writer to help me. I needed somebody to bounce ideas off of. I didn't want to be in the bubble just cutting it by myself. So ultimately, I had a writer come in, and the two of us would bounce things off. And he's right there, Ozzy and Guanzo. And so that was crucial to my process, to have somebody there who knew story and would, fight it out with me and like, what's essential, so that we were stuck to the best way to tell the narrative, really. I don't know. That probably didn't answer your question. Brent, do you have anything on that one?
In terms of like, do stories change in the editing room? Is that kind of what you're getting at? Yeah, they can. This goes with sort of like the popularity of documentaries now. I honestly think a lot of broadcasters are treating them like feature films. Like, we just finished one with TSN that we had to present like an 80-page playbook. I'm like, this is just a script. Like, here's the film. And we hadn't even shot it. We didn't even meet these characters yet. We'd only done phone interviews with them. And so I think it can change, but sometimes when you have a broadcaster on board, they're expecting a certain kind of film. But it can, or you'll find nuances, or you'll find jokes, or you'll find parts, or you'll realize that someone's a much better interview than others. You kind of, it can change.
How are we doing for time? Do we have time for one more question? When do we go till? 10 or 10:15? Oh, good, great, excellent. Okay, there's another hand up in the front row. Yes, you, if we can get a microphone to you.
Thank you. I want to ask about the format of documentaries. So my name's Zach. I'm primarily a fictional narrative filmmaker, and I think maybe a majority of people might be that here. So I'm curious about the format of making, like you talked about earlier, how we're hitting an era where documentaries are becoming more prominent, and I think you mentioned how that's because the form of it is becoming, I don't know, more entertaining, I guess, to audiences. And so what is it about documentaries today that we as, like, if maybe I want to start doing more documentaries, I should be thinking about to, be produced nowadays?
So I think the landscape, the reason the landscape has changed, it doesn't have to do with the fact that people want to make more docs. I think that's been the wave on the fact that broadcasters have accepted more docs. TELUS is doing them, Netflix is doing them, Hulu. It's just, they've opened up this library to allow you to see that. And even within docs, I noticed this is happening with Netflix, is it used to just be a documentary label, and now there's murder mystery, socio-political. Like, we've really hit the comedy docs. That's exactly what we focus on. That's all we focus on. I'm always like, is it funny? Is it real? That's kind of my zone. And I think it's the same with features. It's really kind of horror films, dramas, like they've all kind of separated out. And I think your question is like, you're primarily into narratives, but you're thinking of maybe crossing over? Is that what you're thinking?
I actually got a grant from STORYHIVE, which we're really grateful.
Oh, congratulations!
Yay, STORYHIVE!
Yeah, STORYHIVE. Congratulations.
And it was for a documentary. My director, again, we've normally done fictional stuff, but he
Yeah.
pitched me this documentary, and I was like, and it was I have personal relationship with people with cancer,
Yeah.
so when he pitched the story, I was like, okay.
Yeah, it hit you. Yeah.
I can't say no to this. Let's do it, even though I've never done a documentary before.
Yep.
And so it was a very different experience. We talking about the process and how, like, creating does a change in the edit. Well, I found it's like we didn't really know the story until we shot it all.
Yep.
And then got into the editing room.
Yeah, and I think honestly, I think there's different methods to making all kinds of films, features too. Like some directors work that way too. Some are improv and they just let scenes roll, and some are very strict to the script. Look at all the directors who do documentaries. This sort of hit me the other day. It's like Spike Lee makes documentaries. Martin Scorsese makes amazing documentaries. Judd Apatow just won an Emmy for Gary Shandling documentary.
I love that thing.
It was so good, wasn't it? 4 hours long.
So many of the biggest names have also made documentaries,
Yeah.
and like not just at the start of the career, which is kind of the cliche, like, oh, it's this thing that you do to like learn how to make a film. No, I mean, some of the biggest names have made documentaries at the peak of their career. It's cinema.
And I think it comes down to storytelling. It's still storytelling. I think it's just a different way to present that. I would love to do a comedy one day, but right now, like, docs are like a scripted comedy, but docs are so fun. Like, there's a world for it, and like sometimes there's scenes that happen in your docs that you're like, I could not have wrote that. Like, that just happened, and it sort of comes up. So yeah, it's interesting, and it's going the other way. You talked about Wormwood. Like, Errol Morris is like the king of documentaries, and that's not a documentary. That's like a feature film, and he's got actors. Who's in it? Peter.
Tim Blake Nelson and
Peter
Peter
real
Skarsgård.
actors doing these reenactments. I'm trying to think of who else. Kitty Green, who did Casting JonBenet. That's not a documentary. Like, it's just a beautiful movie.
Right. Yeah, the definitions that we have to give these things really bug me. But I mean, it's like if it's really fiction and nonfiction. You know what I mean? Like it's just hard to define it. Ultimately.
I mean, since 1984, the discussion of what is a documentary versus, is it an objective recording of reality, or if you have scenes with actors saying things, is that disqualified? I think that's kind of put to rest. There's a ton of hybrid docs and films all over the spectrum of whether it's just objective recording of reality versus total formalism. So I think that's pretty much gone under the bridge. Got it. I just feel like we should balance perspectives for a second. We're all talking about like these successful theatrical docs that have been really commercially successful. There would be a lot of other people that would be able to speak who could say, it's really hard for documentary. So we don't want to give a skewed perspective. Certainly the Documentary Organization of Canada has been very active in the last few years to try to like get more sources of funding that have otherwise receded. That we had a lot of cuts in Canada from a lot of the main documentary institutions, the NFB, Telefilm, CBC, etc. So it's good to know that it's not all like, rosy, and it's good to keep the pressure on all those other traditional outlets to still have their funding restored, what was all cut for like 11 years. But with that, but it's still a good time for documentary, but it's not always a slam dunk just because you're making a doc compared to like a feature film.
Well, no, you still have to get people to watch your stuff. Like that's at the end of the day, even if it gets on Netflix. Like I did a talk yesterday for 650 students at a high school, and I told them all to what's it called when you star like take out your phones and star our new Netflix show. Like you have to keep promoting these shows, right? Like and even the fact that Freaks and Geeks is on A&E, it's going to Netflix soon, but the fact that no one in here has seen the doc yet is like, okay, we got to keep pushing this thing. You got to keep doing it. So even if there is new avenues, you still got to be a champion of your movies and get them out there.
Any other questions?
I don't know about you. I'll be sticking around if anyone wants to talk to.
Yeah,
after.
sure.
Actually, we met. I said this to Fran earlier. We met Jasleen, and she's part of our crew. 2 years ago, we did a talk here, and she was at Cap College, and so she's like, "Can I intern for Hodge Films?" And now she's a head producer at Hodge Films. So like, I'm meeting interns if anyone wants to chat later. She's great. She's just so like worked into our company, and I met her here a couple years ago. So
it's turned into a recruitment for Hodge Films. It'll be like one of the industrial musicals. He'll start singing for you if you really show up. I had a question. You were asking about kind of structure and sometimes having to pivot with where the story goes. And there's certainly lots of, I think probably some of the success of Three Identical Strangers is the fact it suddenly takes all these bizarre turns. You're like, what the hell? What? Like, forget The Sixth Sense. Where that film goes is part of its success. And I think whether it's documentary or drama, people love those like bizarre turns that a story takes. For sure. Do you guys did you have to think about the story structure in your films when you're in the edit? Did you try to think, how do I impose a 5-act structure here? Do I think absolutely. Of the rise and fall?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like Freaks and Geeks, it's like we don't introduce Garth Fancier to the 37-minute mark. And I'm like, well, this is like the villain. We're introducing him pretty late if you think about this as an act structure. But I don't want to show him until later because we actually have to show how the show got started and then it got canceled. And so you constantly have to think about it as story structure. I think that's like, if not, you just have hundreds of hours of footage. And like that, you have to have some kind of like Bible to go through and be very strict about that.
Structure is everything. Yeah. When you release information, when you hold it back, that's what creates the fun ride for the audience. Structure is it. It's so important. The more you do that, the more you plan it, the better the ride is for everybody. It's all about that. That's
an excellent takeaway and an excellent lesson because I find often people think, documentary, it's just kind of this free-form thing. Yeah. But like, as you guys just said, no, you need to actually know story when you're making documentary as if you're, in the same way if you're making a movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big time. That kills me. The idea that you just put it in order of how it really happened and that's the truth. Yeah, no way, man. No way.
I love that. I'm going to quote you, especially the no way. Any other questions from the audience? Come on, people. You might not have these people in front of you again. Yes.
I'd love to hear about your interview techniques and how you've developed them over the years interviewing people for your docs.
Great question.
Yeah, really good question. I just have to constantly remind myself to listen. Like, it's not about me. So and I constantly have to do that because you have like Seth Rogen in front of you or someone, and you just want to talk. And I don't know why. That's just a thing. And so I always have to. That's the number one thing I always think of is like, and it's hard to think about listening because if you think about listening, you're not listening, right? So it's like, how do you do that? And it's just also getting instant rapport is massive. There's techniques to getting that, but instant rapport is like, then that person doesn't feel like any cameras around. I don't know. There's lots of things. Open-ended questions. There's lots of ways to
Open-ended question. Yeah.
Like
you never ask a yes or no question.
Yeah, never ask yes or no. Here's like, one question gets you one answer. Just don't ask like 7. There's so many different methods to it, and I think every single person that comes in and every circumstance is different. You can't just like. I'm thinking of Martin Short. Like, you have 7 minutes. That's very different than when we had 3.5 hours with Judd Apatow. Do you know what I mean? That's a different. We took a break. Like, it's a different day. So that's a completely different interview. And I don't know what noise was like. I don't know what the room was like. I don't know what kind of someone's knocking on the door trying to get in. We had like a set. We could do what we want. It was quiet. So they're just 2 different types of interviews. But I knew I needed to get a ton of information from Judd. And you needed a bit from Martin. You just needed him in this film.
Yeah,
so
just sing something, please. The other thing is, especially with, I think, famous people or people who've been telling a story a lot of times, they get into this thing where they just tell it the same way every time. And so part of that is patience, maybe multiple interviews. But if you've just got one, it's trying to find new ways to ask the same question to get around that, like, kind of rote response. That can be... That's really one of the biggest challenges, is getting somebody out of the kind of robotic... I've told the story a million times kind of thing, and that it's that thing, just ask the question a million different ways.
I remember once provoking rage from an interview subject because I accidentally misspoke and I phrased the question wrong. I was interviewing Elizabeth May, and I said something and she misconstrued the premise of the question. And she got mad. She's like, I object to the premise of that question. And she went off. And it was awesome because then she was so animated, so engaged, so emotional. It was a fantastic, to use, dramatic movie terminology, performance. It was a great performance. It had so much. And that was when I realized, oh, I don't have to look smart. If I say something stupid, sometimes I get an awesome answer that's way more cinematic to put in a documentary. Oh, okay. And so from that point on, I've always learned you can sound like an idiot and a schmuck because that's not going to wind up on camera in the film if it gets a great response.
Right.
Yeah, that's good.
I think there's also, and this is actually a great topic for Totally Indie Day, I do think that there is a switch with docs right now. Like, a commissioned film isn't really an indie film. A commissioned documentary where if you're doing like an acquisition, you're going out and making it, that's very indie. You're putting your own money maybe into it, or you're just getting a partner and you're going and making this thing. And I do think the interviews are different. When you're getting a commissioned film, you might have the broadcaster at that interview. You might have like someone from their team or an exec. It's just a different atmosphere. So then you're like, okay, I guess we have to have like craft services here, where you might not have to do that, right? Like, you might just like get lunch yourself. Like, it's just a different kind of world, I think, between there. So, yeah, it's a really good question. I think you just have to keep interviewing a lot, and every once in a while you'll get someone, you'll be like, I've had this kind of person before. Yeah. I've had this sort of person. He's talking really fast, or he's doing, and you just have to kind of morph it.
In addition to just kind of the technique of interviewing, there's been this whole rise of the look of interviews. They look so much more cinematic now, and so many big budget documentaries on Netflix, they just look fantastic. Freaks and Geeks, the documentary, you recreated sets. You mentioned that just now, that you actually would go to great effort to actually have production design. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we just felt, I felt like, we did one. We were like, let's... Paul Feig asked if he could have like one element from Sam Weir's bedroom in his interview, and then we just recreated his entire bedroom. And then once Paul Feig said like that attention to detail is incredible, and then Jason Segel came in and we had the 27-piece drum kit, and he's like, and he was taking photos, and so you just sort of go down that we were getting overboard by the end, like really taking it too far. But it was also fun. It was like putting them back into high school for one day, and it's just the style we wanted with that. Who Let the Dogs Out has no sit-down interviews, 0. It's all moving. And it's just like just different styles and what you want to do. Wormwood has like 95 angles to that interview.
Yeah.
And I think that's the coolest, is like they've taken the one format of a sit-down interview and people are putting themselves into that and making it's become art too. And I watch a lot of films now and go like, wow, I've never thought about doing it that way. So it's cool.
But it's interesting too how you talk about that set design also kind of gained trust from your subject, because they're like, wow, these guys have done their homework. Okay, I'm in a safe place.
Yeah.
It's not telling a traumatic story, but they know they can talk in detail about the show that's the topic because they see that you actually know what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And our team just like, I mean, Allie, we had so much fun making those sets. Like we made crew like McKinley High crew T-shirt. Like we are nerds, and we loved it. So it was just that was the funnest part of it. And not every film is going to be able to do that. There's no way you can make, what would be the Who Let the Dogs Out set? Imagine what that looks like for these people.
A kennel.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I think we're just about out of time. So just please give a warm thank you to our guests, Dava and Brent.
Thank you guys.
And check out their films. You can see Bathtubs Over Broadway tomorrow at 10:30 here at the Vancouver International Film Festival. And how can people see Freaks and Geeks, the documentary?
It's still with A&E, but it'll be on Netflix soon.
So you'll be able to see Freaks and Geeks, the documentary on Netflix, and you can already see a user's guide to how to cheat death right now. So go check out their works, and thank you to Tell a Story Hive for sponsoring today, and thank you, VIFF, for having us.
Thank you.